Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shaden Terrell, educator, activist, dedicated to the freedom and liberation of her people, the lifelong struggle of it. Thank you to everyone who comes back week after week to support us and watch us. Shout out to our new co-conspirators out there coming to join our space today. We welcome you. I also want to highlight at the center, we are still pushing our We Need Black Teachers national campaign. You can find out more about it at www.we-need-black-teachers.org. Also, listen up, y'all. Next week is our Black Belt Educators Convening. If you haven't got your ticket, if you haven't signed up, make sure you are signed up and you are registered. It's going to be some dope folks there. Okay, so make sure you register for that. And shout out to our high school folks who we are targeting with our We Need Black Teachers campaign. Coming up November 22nd will be our virtual national Mbangi led by yours truly, and me too, and Dr. Carr, who's with us today, of course, because it's the last Thursday of the month, but he will also be leading our virtual Mbangi. But let's hop in. So the theme of today's show is finding balance while building the Black educator pipeline. And today we'll be talking about education in the new world, from segregation to integration to liberation. So this is going to be a fire conversation, an interesting conversation. Let's just have many thoughts on it. And our guy, Dr. Carr, is here to spread his wealth of knowledge and passion as well on the topic. So please, of course, not about to read his bio because we already know what my man is out in these streets doing. But welcome to the show, Dr. Carr. They got you on mute. There you go.
Oh, you got it. Hello,
Hello,
my beloved sister and fellow educator, Sister Shana. It's so good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Doc. I'm doing real good. Busy as always, but doing really good.
Struggle continues. I see a solder over your left shoulder, so we got to keep our spirit right. Even as we saw what happened in Philly earlier this week, Russell Maroon Schultz got compassionate release.
He did
get free all political prisoners, and this is what the white supremacist prison industrial complex does. They give you the death penalty. They call it life in prison, and just before you transition to the ancestral realm, they let you out so that they don't have your direct murder on their hands. So let's be very clear. We do not forgive. We do not forget. You killed this brother, but as he transitions to the ancestral realm in the presence of his friends and family, remind that free them all and you will fall. So anyway, at any rate, so I just wanted to mention that. I saw a side that made me think of Russell Maroon Schultz.
Yes. Shout out to him, his family, and of course, shout out to Brother Sharif. That's his folk. So
to our dear brother, yes, Baba Sharif, no question.
Yes, definitely shout out. Yes. But Dr. Carr, welcome today. I feel like today we got a really important topic at hand, especially in talking about the state of our nation and the state of education. And
you mean really the Black nation?
Say it again.
You mean the Black nation?
Definitely, we always talk about the Black nation.
That's for somebody who's listening who might confuse the social structure, who Black people are to other people, with the governance structure, who we are to each other, because there is no our nation when it comes to America. There is no we. Agreed. I'm sorry that these ancestors whispered into your ear and sent you this message to say this would be the topic, but we're going to put this on and while we're talking about ancestors, we are not our ancestors' wildest dreams. Ask them.
Facts. I mean, that's true. And I would love to get into that some more. So, of course,
we're going to get into it. We're going to let the ancestors speak today. Yeah. I'm my ancestor's wildest dream. Did you ask your ancestor what her wildest dream? No, you didn't, did you? Yeah. Stop looking in the mirror. Go ask your ancestors what their wildest dreams were. I don't think
I was going to say, some of them are still alive for you too. Like, right? Like, they're not all dead.
How about that?
Who are in that struggle are still here.
Yeah. It was really their dream for you to be the only nigger on the job. That was their wildest dream. Their wildest dream. You should be ashamed of yourself and burn all those damn t-shirts. Let's continue, please.
Yes. But you actually said two things pivotal to really spark this off for me today. So when you like, well, what nation are we talking about? We talk about the Black nation. I sure am. And the reason why I'm talking about today's topic, education in the new world, integration, segregation to liberation, is because I think a lot of times in these spaces, we do talk about the responsibility of whiteness in determining what our direction should be, what our path should be, what barriers are created for us. And I'm not saying that none of those things are real. Systemic racism is very real. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
supposed to be real. That's how they set it up. It was set up like
Absolutely.
this before we even got here.
Absolutely. We're having
Um,
our conversation in English. That's the first evidence of systemic racism. But yes, that's
exactly.
right. It's invisible often, and we never think about the context in our struggle. We wage our struggle. So you're right.
And even when you say that it's invisible, and we don't like rationalize the context of a world that we are trying to basically integrate into, that wasn't necessarily set
Well,
up for us.
we're trying to change the world. The
Yep.
notion that we were trying to integrate it comes from a very specific set of historical circumstances. And as we have moved forward, that is a complete and utter misrepresentation of what our ancestors were trying to do. And it's a very
Agreed.
deliberate in interpretation and a mischaracterization, because it's being mounted by those who want to keep us in this oppressive system. And that 3 or 4 handful of Negroes who somehow have carved out a little space to operate as being race translators to that system, ostensibly on behalf of the rest of us, who remain in impression while they make a nice little penny in profit writing about how we remain in profession. One of my ejectors used to call it death watch studies. They're very eloquent in talking about the plight of Black people from their ivy-covered halls. But not anymore. Today, we're going to have a different conversation. Our ancestors require it of us. And you, by the way, you academics writing about Black oppression from these coveted white spaces, you are not your ancestors' wildest dreams.
They're not. So one of the questions as I was talking about this topic, right, was, or thinking about this topic was there ever an era in American history, right? Because we know, especially from you, Baba, who, again, oral translation, tradition, and keeping of our history, we know our history started way before America.
Yes.
The birth of slavery. We started way before that.
That's right.
But was there ever a time in American history when you feel like Black education was actually thriving?
Absolutely. It's never stopped thriving. And it depends on how we define Black education. If we define it as the transmission of wisdom, the transmission of knowledge, the transmission of values from generation to generation, we've always figured out a way to do that. We were doing that in captivity. We were doing that on the boats. We were doing that in the holding cells and in the sail pens. And we always figured out a way to do that. Now, would we necessarily characterize that as Black education? I think we have to, because that's the foundation and the source of all of the aspirations of our people. And I saw somebody dropped in, true Afrofuturism would exceed even our wildest dreams. Indeed. And to look for the source of true Afrofuturism, we would have to take the first part of that very seriously, Afro, meaning we have to then tap into how our ancestors thought about the universe. So when you look at the ancient Egyptian concept, for example, of the universe as a constant cycle coming out of a seamless whole, then you understand that the wildest dreams are the most radical Afrofuturists would be something the Egyptians would sit back and say, oh, that's interesting. Keep going. Keep going. You may eventually get to where we were. And that's why dismemberment plays a role. So if we define Black education as passing on wisdom, passing on values, passing on those traditions, passing on the best of our culture, then it has always thrived in the spaces beyond the ability of oppressors to control. Now, then the question becomes, how much of those values, how much of that culture, how much of that orientation and knowledge finds its way into the institutional formations, what we would typically refer to as education. By that, most time people mean institutional education.
Yes.
So then the question then we would ask ourselves is, where do you see institutions where Black people are educated? And that falls into 2 very separate categories that often cross. But one is the institutions Black people create and control. The other is the institutions that Black people don't create and control or control. So what's the first institution you would say in terms of our long sojourn in this settler violence called the United States of America that Black people created and controlled?
If you're talking about an educational institution, like we had our own schools.
Exactly.
We always did.
Exactly. And we had places that wouldn't be labeled schools, but where education took place.
Yes.
Like churches, like ring shouts, like, spaces, hush harbors, even fields, on the plantation. Say it again.
Yes. Fields, plantations. Fields,
no question. Yes. So if you're looking for the sources of Black education, you should not look for a building. You should look for formations that Black people control. And so whether it be, and I just give you a quick example as a footnote, when we say, oh, black people fought in the Civil War, they fought for the Union. Yeah, most of them ran away and figured out ways to crater the economy from within the Confederate economy. But even those who took on the military uniform of the United States colored troops, you look in a place like South Carolina, the so-called Gospel Army, the South Carolina 1st Regiment, every night they would do the ring shout and engage in their cultural ritual. And the white observers were like, what are they doing? He said, they have brought their values, their education, their system, their way of knowing into that military uniform. So yes, that white soldier and that black soldier both have on the military, but the historians will read it as black people fought their way into the military and they served honorably. Hold on. But the Gospel Army brought their education from the fields into that uniform. And every night, if you listen to them, that's not European, that's not American, that's not Western. And if you try to make it that, you have done those ancestors a disservice. You're not listening to them. You want them to sing your song, and they refuse to sing your song in a strange land. Ain't that what your Bible told them? How can we sing our song in a strange land? Ain't that what Fred Douglass said and went to the slaves the 4th of July? They that carried us off captive required of us a song. Fast forward to every damn award show and every Negro looking for a statue from their oppressors and happy because they got it's very nice. How can we sing our song in a strange land? Those soldiers in the Gospel Army did the ring shout. That's education. So the black church, not just the black church, the invisible black mosque, because many of those enslaved Africans were Muslims, and most of them, the overwhelming majority, were not Muslims, were not Christians. They brought their spiritual traditions.
Yep. And the reason why I'm asking that question is like, number one, to frame this conversation. I think that a lot of times, in these spaces, when we talk about education, we think from an institutionalized perspective.
That's right.
And I think that we have to develop a deeper understanding of us as Black folks. And we call it, we talked about this, we call it survival, but we're doing more than surviving. We're being who we are.
That's right.
Meaning people don't have to give us things in order for us to thrive. We know, right, how to adapt. We know what to do. So we don't need buildings. We don't necessarily need institutions to educate ourselves, our people. And education isn't one way, right? Yep. So education doesn't necessarily mean you get an education from a K through 12 experience. We all know it's all types of education that our people get. So I asked that question to be able to frame this conversation for our audience of when we're speaking about education or responsibility to our nation and our people, we have to get out of this very narrow-minded thinking that we've been conditioned to think of education as an institution or a building.
That's right. That's right. And don't start. So as you said, I mean, get beyond the institution. But since there's going to be bricks and mortar given out, we want it too. And that leads us to, you have a frame for this that I'm going to follow. I'm going to answer questions as you pose them. But I do want to mention in that first question you raised in terms of was there ever area when we were thriving? The answer to that is yes. And it came from what we brought with us, which is why finally I remember, many years in school district Philadelphia arguing about this and then just deciding, why am I arguing with y'all? We got some allies. Let's go build something. And of course, we did Philadelphia Freedom Schools, and we continue to have it. And we're going to talk about the book we're reading for the year round in Bongi. If you're a teenager out there, we want you to join us next month. But I said, let me give you a very simple example to people doing curriculum. I said, there's a book called From Slavery to Freedom. Oh, that's an excellent book. I said, the first place you got to start arguing with is the title. Instead, I would scrub that title, and here's the title for you: From Freedom. ...
Because what?
Yeah, we didn't start with slave. If you start your history with slave, but they came here as enslaved. Okay, we're not going to quibble over whether they were indentured service. We're talking about a concept. Carter G. Woodson talking about his father and his grandfather in an article he wrote in 1944, the Negro History Bulletin, My Recollection of Veterans of the Civil War, never refers to his father as a slave. He says, my father was a bondsman, meaning what? He was in bondage.
Yes.
When he goes, you're going to stop doing. Now, Woodson didn't get into no great polemic about it. Was just a very simple thing in the 40s where he says, bondsman, meaning what? I like a book that said From Freedom. Wow. We started free. Then you put some chains on me, and I've never stopped trying to reacquire my legal freedom. And in my mind and in my practice, I never inhabited the identity of slave. When you say from slavery to freedom, of course, now you're going to write a history because it ain't got nothing to do with me. It's got to do with you. And you know what you're going to do? You're going to congratulate yourself. Every time one of us fights their way into some resources, you're going to say, see, our country is living up to its values. We may haven't done it yet, but we will. You really want to examine your country's values?
So
do you really want to have a conversation about your country's values? You really want to talk about the Federalist Papers? Do you really want to talk about the constitutions of the state? Do you really want to talk about the Constitutional Convention? No, you do not. And I don't give a damn how many minstrel shows you put on Broadway with black people rapping like the George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. I don't give a damn how many minstrel shows you put on. The ancestors speak. You are not your ancestors.
yes. And you led into, again, even with all of the social structures that are occurring and happening right now.
Yeah.
So what you're leading into is another thing. Like, in what ways would you say like integration changed the landscape for Black education or education period? Because when you start with the notion of freedom, right, and not from slavery to freedom.
Yeah.
I just think that there's this
slavery to freedom. No, from freedom.
But there's this concept of integration is what's going to bring people freedom. And I would love it, even again, our folks watching today, to definitely interact in the chat with this.
Please.
I have my own thoughts, but I'm not going to make an argument right now one way or another. But that integration somehow is what brings us closer to freedom. What I will say and what I will argue is integration just brings us proximity to whiteness. And
it definitely does that. And we know whiteness more intimately than any group of people in this country, including white people.
Yes.
Because whiteness is a cobbled together identity that relies on blackness as its anti.
Yes.
So even white people don't understand how whiteness
works.
The way black people understand, the victims of whiteness, along with the Native Americans, but yeah. So no, we one of the reasons, and of course, this is the foundation for our freedom schools. Our freedom schools tap into the ancestors. And so what we do is we don't start with our opinions, our thoughts. We take very seriously the instruction to let the ancestors speak.
Yep.
Philadelphia freedom schools are different in this fundamental regard. We take very seriously the concept of reading, of listening, of thinking before we speak. And whereas other people will put on some t-shirts with a Harriet Tubman picture or something, or maybe write a nice poem or something. No, we're going to sit and listen to the ancestor. You have to respect your ancestors. You have to listen to them. And so one of the things that we're doing, I mean, every year since 1999, we've picked a book, at least one, often two. And now we got this year round. We've been doing that for many, many years now. And we do a year round book. And the book, of course, we're continuing with in Oranbongi. Again, if you're a teenager, come with, what's the date?
November 22nd, 7 p.m.
What's happening on November 22nd? And every month and every date, every Monday of that was that the third or fourth Monday of the.
I can't remember if it's the third or the fourth.
Either way, but what's gonna happen on the 27th?
On the 22nd, that's us. That'll be our first launch of our first launch of our virtual Mbongi with you. On that Monday, that third Monday, at 7 p.m. So our next show, I'll definitely have the link out for folks to register.
Excellent.
And send to high school students.
So is it restricted to high school students in the Philly area?
No, this is national.
Okay. Well, I'm assuming then that means it might be even international.
That's why it's at 7 p.m. I don't know the international time clock.
7 p.m. Eastern time, ET.
Standard time. So even if you in California, it gives you enough time to get out of school, get on home, and log on in.
Word. I love it. This is the book we're reading, y'all. So if you're going to get The Lost Education of Horace Tate,
Horace Tate, mine somewhere too.
I know that's right. Horace Tate eventually was the director of the Georgia Teachers and Educators Association, which was the Black teachers of Georgia. And as we've talked, there it is. This is what I'm talking about. If everybody join, you see, we ready, y'all. We listen to the ancestors. Professor Walker at Emory University, brilliant sister, has listened to the ancestors, and she used the testimony of Brother Tate, his wife, Mother Virginia Tate, who just made transition this year in her mid-90s, and all of the teachers across the South and across the country, Black teachers who were the master teachers. And so when you ask, what were the fundamental education issues, they wanted resources, and they wanted equal pay. They wanted all those things. And so at Howard, I teach a lot of students, and I have a lot of students in class. This semester I have, I guess, around 2,200 students. 1,800 of them are in our freshman seminar. So we're reading a separate book. Bob Moses, actually, the book that he called into existence, Quality Education as Constitutional Right, that we talked about. But I've got a class called Education in Black America I just came from. It's about 100 students in that class. And we're reading, at this point, this is one of 4 books we read, Lost Education of Horace Tate. And today we were finishing up And I wasn't prepared for what happened. I blame this on you because I told them I was coming here with you and you would ask me this broad topic. So I was like, Lord. And so what I did was I pulled books that I've showed many times in our conversation, which is the histories of the American Teachers Association. This is Thelma Perry's book. She wrote the general history, and then there are histories of Texas and Mississippi and South Carolina and so forth, all of the southern states. These were the Black educators. Some of these organizations go back into the late 19th century. These are the Black teachers, not just K-12, colleges and universities, the HBCUs. And so when I say we're not our ancestors, people say, well, yes, we are. Okay, before you say yes, we are, did you ask them what their wildest dreams were? Well, no, I didn't. Okay, so what we did today, because we're reading this book line for line, it is very powerful. Today, for example, I wasn't prepared for what happened. We covered the chapter, for example, where, remember I said Virginia and Horace Tate, we know we're educators in Georgia.
Yes.
Brother Tate lost his job at a couple of schools because the white people's like, you ain't gonna just build your school and have the same bleachers as the white school has, or we're not gonna pay Black teachers the same. We were in control of our education. Meanwhile, they're educating their children to the highest standard. What Vanessa Walker, in another book she writes, which is co-written with a brother who was a principal in North Carolina, what he called Brother Bias, Principal Bias, Ulysses Bias, their highest potential. We had the expectation during segregation. Now, does that mean everybody reached it? No. Does that mean every teacher was great? No. But it means institutionally that thrust from the community found its way into the brick and mortar. We want better buildings. We want equal pay. But what we don't want is your values. We got our own values. We taught them at Sunday school. We taught them on the street, and we're going to teach them in this school. And that battle. So while Horace and Virginia Tate are there in Georgia, Harry and Harriet Moore in Florida are fighting. There's a history of the Florida State Teachers Association, and I won't go state by state because I got them all sitting right here, but I'm not going to do it. Oh, wait, I will show you though. Gilbert Porter and Liddell Nealon. This is the history of the Florida State Teachers Association. These brothers were one was a professor and another was a dean at Florida A&M College. You're not your ancestors' wildest dreams. How do I know? Because we listened to the ancestors and we know what they said their dreams were. This is not it. In terms of the schools are more segregated now than they were during this period. And guess what disappeared? The teachers that when integration came, they fired those Black women and men. The principals who they turned into assistant principals or put in the classroom. The teachers who they said you could be a janitor or something in here, or you can just get the hell out. The people they fought. And then finally the national got a smoke for the National Education Association, NEA. The NEA merged with the ATA. Many Black teachers, and we're going to read about this, our high school students are going to read about this. They said, okay, it's good to merge because it's going to give us enhanced resources, but then we're also hesitant. Why? Because the NEA had a bunch of racists in the South who were in the state branches of the NEA, like the GEA, the Georgia Education Association, who were against the Black teachers. And now they're going to use the national organization to squeeze these teachers. And so what you see Horace Tate and them is like, we're going to join, but we got to be real careful about what integration looks like. Because remember, we're not here for white values. If you're talking about building a different country, we're all in. And as Martin Luther King, who spoke to the Georgia Teacher and Educators Association in downtown Atlanta, their national conference, he said, let me tell y'all something. Integration without us retaining and expanding our power is not integration. We should not integrate if it means we got to give up all of our values, all of our pieces. People don't like that about Dr. King. They want to go and stick him on a rock monument and say, oh, I have a dream. Yeah, he did have a dream. You better listen closely. Why? Because his dream was. Right, because when he's talking to us, he's saying, my dream is not to disappear. My dream is not for white racists to say, Dr. King wanted a color with a place where you weren't judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. And why do you assume the content of your character is set by a white standard?
Had to be to proximity to whiteness.
Proximity to whiteness. They were not pushing to disappear culturally. They were pushing for resources and for people who wanted to build a different society. So anyway, so we're reading these. We're reading that book. And so today, I said, Harry Moore and Harriet Moore, who were in Florida, the counterparts of Horace Tate, and Virginia Tate, they went to bed Christmas night, December 1951. And I played for these students, Sweet Honey in the Rock's Ballad of Harry T. Moore. These white boys put a bomb under their bedroom, the floor of the house, the little cottage they lived in. The bomb blew up. Harry T. Moore, died in his mother's lap. coughed up a big spurt of blood and died right there at the hospital they got him to. His wife died 9 days later. During the time that she lingered, she said, "My husband is dead. I don't have any reason to continue to live."
Mm.
Not only don't I forgive that, I cradle that like a child. I cradled it like a child, those ancestors. Two teachers, two school teachers who only wanted the teachers to be paid fairly.
That's it.
Yeah. And so, Andrew DeSantis, the white nationalist governor of California, of Florida, I have nothing to say to you except come, baby, come here. I don't share anything with you. Y'all blew up Harry T. Moore and Harriet Moore. You literally blew them up because they just wanted the teachers to be paid the same, and they fought. And guess where you can find out about it? Ask your ancestors.
Yes.
Not your ancestors' wildest dreams. You don't even know what their dreams were. Their dreams were to have the teachers that teach you paid. And now here we are in 2021 with a handful of teachers, because that generation was wiped out by our open enemies who came to the table smiling like integration. You're fired, you're fired, you're fired. Oh no, but we want you. You're fired, you're fired, you're fired. Oh, but we want you. And the black teachers are screaming, which is why then I moved to the dedication page of some of these. So Thomas Patterson, the history of the Arkansas educators, he dedicated it to this history of the Arkansas Teachers Association is dedicated to black educators past and present, and to their dedication, sacrifices, and courage. Then I read from the Louisiana educators, Ernest Middleton. Ernest Middleton dedicated it to my mother, Viola P. Middleton, to the memory of my father, and to all black teachers who kept the torch of knowledge burning in the minds of boys and girls throughout Louisiana, your ancestors' wildest dreams. The Palmetto Association, that's South Carolina. Let me see who he dedicated it to, John Potts. To the founders and former members of the Palmetto Education Association who did so much with so little for so many. May we always remember their unselfish and devoted services to the teaching profession and to the progress and development of the people of South Carolina. I could go on and on, but I'm gonna pause there for a minute, because as we went through each state, those young people, we on Zoom, they in the chat, and then when I said I finished, when I'm unmuted and said, how could we forget? They said, having read the Lost Education of Horace Tate, then leading us these dedications, page after page, and they naming all the teachers, they're naming all the associations. Thelma Perry, Cleopatra Thompson out of Mississippi, who was born in Egypt, Mississippi, dedicating it to those teachers who sacrificed everything. These young people today, having heard their ancestors, they said, we're ashamed. We are ashamed. Why are we not sacrificing? And I'm talking about students, some of whom are in a building right now on the campus of Howard University. Blackburn takeover. They've taken over the student center because some of them are living in dorms that have had mold. Many of them, they don't have reliable wireless. Many of them are housing insecure because the housing prices in DC are through the roof. And while the freshmen got rooms and some of the sophomores, many junior seniors were driven off campus. Meanwhile, the administration of Howard University, who love black people, I don't question anybody's loyalty, but they think, well, they got a better plan. And so they've decided we're not negotiating with y'all. You got to get out of that building. And then they're saying, well, this isn't in the tradition of Howard protests. Oh man, go ask
tradition. I don't know how you name a tradition of a protest.
Well, you do it by being arrogant enough to think I don't have to listen to the ancestors. And my thing is, go with God, baby. Don't listen to the ancestors. See where that leads your ass as your head cracks like an egg against the brick wall of white supremacy. And as you lay there bleeding, you ask yourself, why?
So I think that leads us
listen to your ancestors. Oh.
Folks aren't, and I think folks sometimes get confused about. Again, we started the program with talking about what your ancestors' wildest dreams would be, right? Like, I think so. Folks get confused about that, but it leads me to have some questions too. And it leads me to think about a lot of times we focus on racism, but in the Black community, there's a lot of classism. And I think that a major part of the dynamics that happen within the Black community have to do with the rich, the poor still, right? I mean, nobody's going to be as rich as the richest white man, but the Black bourgeois,
that's right,
as we can refer to them as. That's and my question there sometimes leading, what is their responsibility to the community? And I can break this up into so many different sections. So like one,
I'm
because
just
like one
around
one of
because
the questions I have is like, do Black teachers have the responsibilities to stay and teach in Black school districts? Like, so if I'm a Black teacher and I'm teaching in the suburbs, right, and I'm teaching white kids, or I go to a private school and that demographic is predominantly white,
yeah.
do I have a responsibility? Like, is that seen as a disadvantage or an advantage in nation building, right? Because they would say like white kids need to see Black folks too, right? Which I think we get that. But if your own community is still, fractioned, if your own community is still in disarray, is it your responsibility to stay there and go there and help those folks? Because again, somewhat you are privileged and you have arrived to a degree. So is it your responsibility to go back and help?
Well, I think the educators in the segregated educational institutions and the ones who joined the American Teachers Association, all these state histories we keep referring to, would say you do have an obligation. But they were saying it from a space where they didn't have a choice. They were in the segregated institutions.
Yep.
Leads us to a much more difficult question to answer, which is, when we say Black community, what do we mean? The Black community was held together through common oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you lift the hedge of legal segregation, what you see is the Black community begins more closely to resemble, in terms of class aspiration, the white community.
Mm-hmm.
So there was always a tiny group of Blacks who had figured out ways to operate, who were either born into or found their way into nominal freedom. The James Fortons in Philadelphia, the Paul Cuffeys in New England. And then they made certain deliberate choices to fight for abolition, in Cuffey's case to return to Africa. And you see that strain. That's some of the people whose names we know, the Frederick Douglasses, the Martin Delaney's, and so forth. Again, coming back to Philadelphia, the founders of the Institute for Colored Youth. I encourage people to get a book by my friend and brother Jelani Favors, who's at North Carolina A&T, and I'm repping A&T today, who wrote a book called Shelter in the Time of Storm, the history of HBCUs. And he says, when you look at 1837, you have at the Institute for Colored Youth, which becomes Cheyney University, you've got a Black faculty. Octavius Catto. I mean, you're looking at Black people. So they are with us because they say, I am best prepared. I've studied and I'm here to help us advance. Now, here we are in 2021. You got a different set of circumstances. You have common white oppression, but it's now more invisible. Once those laws change, it's a very interesting book called Overturning Brown, the Segregationist Legacy of the Modern School Choice Movement. Steve Sweets. And we talked about this last time we were together. Sweets tracks the fact that many of these private schools and academies, particularly in the South, were created in the years after Brown so that white people didn't have to go to school with Black people.
Yes.
In fact, in Arkansas, in Virginia, they literally canceled school for a whole year. They said nobody will go to school. And so it's like, well, damn, Black people say, well, at least white people ain't going to school. Wait, where are you going? I'm going to school. But they stopped school. Now we're in the private school. So when you see something, Snowy Slope Academy, Blooming Flower Academy, all that itch, many of them are the private schools that were created to stop their children from going to school with you. And guess what? It's not enough to create private schools. Now they're going to scheme on how to get your tax money to support it. It's called vouchers.
Well, I mean, there's even in public education, you have magnet schools.
Well, see, and this is the thing. Everything planned to replicate class sensibility. And then you get Negroes with no historical memory who think they're doing a favor by going over there. So the question you ask, do they have a responsibility? The answer is yes and no. Yes, if you understand the difference between culture and race. I'm thinking about something Denzel Washington once said in an interview. They were saying, well, can white directors direct Black movies like about slavery and stuff? He said, it's not about color, it's about culture. He said Steven Spielberg directed Schindler's List. He says, I'm sure that Martin Scorsese could have directed Schindler's List. He said, but there's a certain cultural experience that he brings to that. He said, now in terms of Black people directing Black movies, I'm sure that either one of them could direct a Black movie, but you and I both know what it means for a hot comb to go through hair, the smell, the context, the care. He said, now, if you don't have a feel for that, if you're going to direct a movie about Black people, you're going to have somebody teach you. He said, but don't confuse race with culture. And so if you are a Black person demographically, you've done well, you performed in your teacher education stuff, and you say, I really don't want to be bothered with those children in the inner city schools because it's just difficult. You know what? You go with God to the academy. You belong there. And you will be, you're great. And then when that wall hits you in your head, cracks like an egg on the brick of white supremacy, and you come bleeding back to the community like, help me, they discriminate. We will tell you, we will help you, but
we'll help you.
We'll help you because you're part of the Black community demographically, but culturally, we probably don't want you teaching our kids because we peeked in your classroom and here you are again, got them dressed up like pilgrims because you think somehow this is the best, or you teaching them a new iteration of the From Slavery to Freedom model. Maybe it's the 1619 Project, and you're helping them understand that they came into the world off the water. So we probably don't need you. And if you want to come back, the door will always be open. But before it is, we need to engage in some teacher training because we're building a Black educator pipeline, and that's not just demographic, it's cultural.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So you can't just walk in here and you pass the demographic test and you want to, and that goes for non-Black teachers too. You down? Okay, let's see where you're down culturally. You need to understand. And have you talked to the ancestors? No, but I know that I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. Well, maybe in terms of nightmare, if you're defining wild dream as nightmare, then you certainly are the wildest dream. But so the finally, I would say is that, when you think about this question of should teachers have the responsibility to stay in Black school districts, we know that comes down to a question of commitment and institutional memory. And so when we read these ancestors' words, they were in schools that were often the worst buildings. They raised their own money during Reconstruction and then after. Then during the Rosenwald schools of the 1930s and 40s, they double taxed themselves. The buildings weren't the best, but the education in the buildings, as I think about Philadelphia Freedom Schools sitting up in Temple in North Philly in 2000, 2002, 2003, 2005, all the way to now. If we have each other, we got the text, and we get into deep intellectual work, we want the budget for sure.
Yep.
But even if we don't have the budget, we will achieve our objective because our ancestors did. That's their wildest dream, to achieve the objective. Do you know what the objective is? Yeah, no, the objective isn't for you to get a job and turn around and get on the cover of some magazine or newspaper and say, see, we made it. No, we didn't make it. They picked you out. And then what happened to the other teachers? Well, ask Horace Tate, ask Virginia Tate, ask Harry Moore, ask Harriet Moore, ask the teachers, ask Cleopatra Thompson and Thelma Perry, ask J. Rupert Peacock, who wrote the history of the Black educators of Virginia. Ask them what happened. And then I just mentioned one other quote from Martin Kilson, who's from Pennsylvania. It's called Transformation of the African American Intelligentsia. He said there was a Pew survey in 2007. 37% of African Americans agree with the idea that Blacks today can no longer be thought of as a single race because the Black community today is so diverse. Then he says a majority of 53% disagrees. This is 2007, say, no, we have to be together because we have so much in common. But then they say a majority of African Americans say that the values of the poor and middle class Blacks have grown more dissimilar over the past decade. That's because the Black middle class and upper class, so to speak, their values have begun to look more and more like the white middle and upper class.
And for the context of this conversation, real quick, can you define what the Black bourgeois is?
Well, the Black bourgeois, and to use a very simple definition, and again, we were talking about E. Franklin Frazier's book, Black Bourgeoisie, a couple of last month. I think the 1957 book that he wrote. The idea is, and this comes out of Marx and Engels, Karl Marx, Frederick Engels. The idea is that human societies are organized, modern societies are organized classes. You got a lower class, you got a working class. They're providing the labor that animates the economic system we're in. Below them, you got people who may not be employed. That's the reserve pool of labor. You keep them around so you can keep that working class working for small value. Because again, the idea is to create a surplus value of labor. You want people's labor to create value for you. Above them are the people who own the means of production, who own the structures that these people are laboring in. It could be enslaved, it could be debt peonage, it could be wages, but that's why organized labor is such a threat. When you organize labor, you're challenging that manager class because their job is to squeeze profit. If they paying you X number of dollars an hour at Walmart, they're making a ton of money just sitting at their house with the investments and the profits that are coming in. So above them, you have the true bourgeois, which is the people who are at the very top, they're the owners. They're the hundreds of billionaires that have been created over the last year during this George Floyd, Breonna Taylor moment of racial reckoning. They've gotten richer. Jeff Bezos, you name it, Mark Zuckerberg, all these people, they just getting rich, reaping the profits off the labor. But between them and the bourgeois, who are the manager class for those people, who are also getting some profits, but their dream is to get stock. Their dream is to, invest. Their dream, but they make pretty good salaries managing everybody else. There's a little sliver called the petty bourgeoisie. These are the Negroes who are really kind of working class. But as E. Franklin Frazier says, in terms of black petty bourgeois, these are the Negroes who get $5 and spend $2 of it leasing a SUV. These are the people who go underwater on their mortgage because they done bought more house than they can afford. These are the people who get the flashy clothes, who are fronting on Instagram or wherever. And these are the people who start these associations so they can pretend they are part of the true bourgeoisie. No, the little bourgeois. They're not really.
I appreciate that breakdown, and I appreciate you even talking about the petty bourgeois. And the reason why I'm saying that,
the little bourgeois.
Everybody in this room right now, including you, me, the folks on this thread, can identify with any of those categories. And like any of them. And I challenge people to reflect on who you are within that category. Because again, this is something that I struggle with in terms of like, I would never see myself necessarily as a bourgeois. But when you talk about a class system, though, and people have humbled me and reminded me that because my struggle is still in the fight with people who would be considered lower class, and that's who my pockets may not identify with them, but my struggle does.
No, your pockets identify with them. Here's the way. And imagine, I'm just talking about economic system, not talking about values. Because one of the markings, and Frazier writes about this, and this was years ago. There's been a ton of stuff since then. But what he talks about is something, for example, conspicuous consumption. So values is different. You might not have any money, but you go buy the most expensive iPhone because you can flaunt that around and people can see it and make an assumption about your class based on the things you have. That's why he calls it conspicuous consumption. In other words, and people say, well, you see rich people, they don't be wearing clothes like you. No, because one of the elements of oppression is you aspire to that status, but you will try to front like you had it before you acquire it, which the trick means you're always trapped in that lower class status. And here's how you can tell whether you're bourgeois or not bourgeois economically. Can you miss a check?
You said, can
you miss a check?
Maybe one.
Exactly. If you can't miss 2 checks, you are not bourgeois. Please understand. If you can, so all you Negroes, oh yes, well, these black people, these poor working class people. Okay, I understand. Can you miss 2 checks?
No.
Can you miss a check? If the answer to that is no, take yourself out of the true bourgeois. You might be a petty bourgeois fronting conspicuous consumption Negro because you use your money after you've paid your mortgage or your rent to buy stuff you don't need, so you can front like you're a member of that class, and you look up in that class and you realize they ain't even looking at you. They don't even count money. If you counting money, you're not part of the true bourgeoisie.
I'm counting money. Okay, got to count money. Okay,
right here, all my money, which speaks to the issue when you ask about where teachers should be. Read the history of these educators. It is about sacrifice. I don't have a lot of money in my bank account because every time I get $2, I spend $1.50 of it on books. Why am I buying money for these books? Why did it take me years to get these teachers associations? So when I'm in class with students, whether it be my students at Howard or anywhere else, including freedom schools, they can now, through these books, listen to the voice of their ancestors and make different choices.
That's sacrifice, but that's just sacrifice with a purpose. You understand?
Right.
And I think that what this brings me to, and why I wanted to talk about bourgeois and class and sacrifice, is the most important word, because I think that a lot of us, just as people, are faced with many dilemmas, especially when you talk about the state of education and Black education.
Yes.
Are people wrong because they want to send their kids to a private school, or they don't want to send their kids to a neighborhood school? Or is that a sacrifice that we all need to be committed to making? That with our level of education, our level sometimes of dedication, or just knowing, and those of us who do know what our ancestors want, is it our responsibility that when we have children, to keep our children in the local schools or the schools that are predominantly Black, even though those may not be seen as the most popular? Or, there's always been this argument for years of like, you know, people go get educated, then they move out the hood, right? Like that's the goal. Like we got to move out the hood.
Mm.
Are those principles necessarily the right principles in order to really seek liberation as a whole within the Black community? Somebody said earlier in the chat, like, how do we erase this individualism versus you know, the need for communalism? Like, how? But I think that all of us inside this room and participate in this conversation right now can identify with principles of the Black bourgeois. Or if you have a kid feeling like, I just want better for my kid, like I'm just in this constant need to want better for my kids. So even on our last episode when we talked about, and it hit me hard, Black people using their kids as batting rams,
Du
to
Bois.
to break down, you know,
Mm.
the doors of what folks might have thought was we breaking down the doors of white structure, but like you just really breaking down doors to be in the integration and assimilation, and that killed the communalism and what Black education was back then.
That's right.
So I just question and reflect on that in terms of as a Black person who is privileged, right? And privileged in the sense, like, I ain't rich, right? I'm still in the
Relative, no,
process.
relative, right? You got
Right.
a place to live, you
I
got
got a
some
place to
furniture,
live.
you got
I'm
somewhere to get to work.
educated. I got
No question.
degrees. You know what
No
I mean?
question.
Like,
No question.
I have all that, so privileged. Is it my responsibility to feel like I would go back and sacrifice all that you're supposed to be rising up to American dream to, if I have a kid, to place my kid in a local public school or to live around what people would be considered to lower class, so that they don't have this permanent underclass structure that if we all pull together, um, it'll be mixed.
Shana, that's an impossible question to answer, I think. No, it is. And I'll tell you why it's impossible, because there is reality. The easy answer is yes, you have a responsibility. But circumstances have a great deal to do with it. Your generation, which is, you know, the generation right next to my generation, Baba El Meki's generation, Sharif, let's just take three of us as an example. You two are East Coasters. And in Baba Sharif's condition, he grew up in African-centered schools there in Philadelphia. That wasn't an option for me in Nashville. By the time you came along, there were two solid generations of Black power and Black arts movement people who had built institutions up and down the East Coast, from Boston and Newark to New York and DC and Philly. And so you came into an environment where the ground had been prepared by African-centered educators, so that even if you weren't in an African-centered school, you got some of that stuff. You just around that stuff. It wasn't unusual to you. For me, I was born in 1965. I was in that second generation of kids who integrated. My older cousins were the first ones in the building. And then we came along. We were the fourth and fifth and sixth. So we saw what it looked like up close. But we came out of Black communities that were still contiguous, that were still together. So at our church, you had every class level represented, and there was a common sense from those elders of what they were doing. Many of them were teachers. But what has transpired since the 1960s, 70s, and 80s and 90s now, and the farther we get away from that, the more diverse the community gets, because there's the cohesiveness isn't holding it together in the same way. So when you ask if people have a responsibility, I would say yes, but not those Negroes who think it's their responsibility to come and lecture the poor Black people about values. No, because what you've been away from it now. And in my case, while I completely reject the idea that integration is a solution, it's based on my life experience. Just like those who completely embrace the idea that is a solution, is based on their experience. I went to integrated schools. I know what it's like to be said, oh, you're bright, so we're going to push you. And then to see all of my Black classmates not pushed in the same way. I also know what it's like to be held in contempt by teachers who could hide it with a smile by giving different assignments or responsibilities. I look back now, I understand that. I also understand that as an educator, I was going to be a lawyer. Why? Because we're going to smash these institutions for what they've done. And it took me going to law school and going through the training and then clerking at places like NAACP Legal Defense Fund to understand how integration works and how that's not really what they mean is a complete whole society. This is a strategy for undermining Black institutions and maintaining control over Black people. But I know that from the inside. This ain't no study. I lived that. And then when I went into graduate study to teach in Black studies, a very deliberate choice, I then made the choice to work in Black institutions, a Black school district, Philadelphia, a Black university, Howard. And so there's nobody on the planet that can sit and lecture me about the nature of integration unless they have walked in my shoes. And what I find is many of the most brilliant people I know, my friends who they're ensconced in white institutions, becoming the very thing they've written about critiquing. And so my thing is, I don't want those people teaching Black children. Why? Because for all of your genius, the message you're also saying is, and your aspiration should be to leave. Your aspiration should be to leave. Don't go to the HBCU, or if you go to HBCU undergrad, make sure you go to a good graduate school. You know, you don't even know you're reinforcing this thing that is killing our people. Meanwhile, while all that little petty bourgeois talk is going that we're all involved in, the people keep dying. The people keep dying. I'm thinking about the last poets. While y'all doing all that arguing, the people are dying. The people are dying. And this goes for the African-centered people too. Think about their poem, Two Little Boys. Have you seen the little boy stuffing his face late at night, hopped up on drugs out there confronting these people? And meanwhile, you parading around in the robes of your ancestors. And while you're parading around in the robes of your ancestors, the people are dying, Breonna Taylor. The people are dying, George Floyd. Then they come and give you a nickel in guilt money, and you turn around like that's yours. You built your whole program of professional development.
And the people are dying.
A sister was killed in her street, right? And the people are dying. Like you ain't doing a damn thing. You getting a job for two of y'all and your friends. They call it diversity, equity, and inclusion. And meanwhile, the people are dying. You ain't even using your tools the way these. Do you know who recruited the students who killed Jim Crow in Little Rock with Daisy Bates? Who killed Jim Crow in Virginia? The Black teachers and the Black parents. And this was not their dream. For your ass to be somewhere in the Ivy writing about them. That's not their dream at all. And we will fight anybody who come out with the foolishness that somehow that was their dream. That's a lie.
It is a lie. It's an
open your ancestors, an open lie.
It is an open lie, which is why, again, it's so funny, right? All it was a text, but our minds are on the same accord.
No question. Because the ancestors speaking through us. We listen to the ancestors. And if you're out there, we write our own curriculum. Guess who doesn't get to assess what we do? Somebody. I don't give a damn. I want everybody to hear me. I'm talking about everybody. I think some of y'all understand what I'm saying, what I'm about to say. When we wrote Philadelphia Freedom School's curriculum, we started from scratch. We started from classical Africa, came through medieval Africa, put a whole framework relied on by teachers and scholars and teachers who came together. Guess who doesn't get to assess its importance? Somebody who don't know a damn thing about it. You don't know a damn thing about it. And if you're going to line that up to be judged by an alien rubric, anybody let you do that? I don't want you teaching our children, period.
Yes. And I so identify with that. And I think that today, for me, was definitely an open call to the carpet. You know, we come here every week, and we
do it every week.
And I think we gotta think about what our roles are.
That's right.
In this society, in building the Black educator pipeline, and in securing that for our children. I think, again, I'm calling myself to the carpet.
Me too. No. We're talking to each other and everybody. No, as some of my friends say, everybody can get it.
Everybody, including me.
Including me. Right. That's right. Every day. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, because I think it's important to. I think a lot of people talk at people, and again, we make our own. We talk about people in ivory towers, but there's certain subjects where we build our own ivory towers for, where we talk down to people, or don't feel like we have our own social responsibility in this. But thank you. I think that is important that we hold ourselves accountable too, always.
We must.
And that's why I wanted to bring up the bourgeois, because I think some of us have to see ourselves wrapped up in that topic, in that conversation. And what is our responsibility to, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to change it? One of the most important things I thought about too is, like, a lot of us are sitting here with kids, young people who could be out in these streets sacrificing, who could be out in these streets teaching. And I think we have a responsibility to continue to build that up. But I think there's always this constant conflict of, like, that somebody else's kid could do that. I'm gonna inspire somebody else's kid while I let my kid go and be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever. Or because I'm privileged, allow my kid to have the freedom to choose what they want to choose. But y'all poor Black people, I need y'all kids, you know what I mean? Y'all ain't got no other choices. I need
Right.
y'all kids to come on
Right.
and be in this fight. And I think
Sacrificial lamb.
that's
That's right. And it's nothing wrong. We need doctors, lawyers. We need all that. But are you going to do it for the people?
and do you see yourself and your family as a part of that struggle?
Oh, you'll
And
see as soon as you hit that brick wall and your head cracked like an egg. That's when you see, oh, we need y'all. Oh, now you come running over here. And this is no shade. This is no shade to anyone who is involved in race work. But that means you must be excellent. This is not charity work. I'm so glad you said what you said. We have to always police ourselves. You don't talk down to the people. The people are the source of our inspiration and our instruction. Always. That's why this is one of the things I love about us with Freedom Schools. From the beginning, the very first day of Freedom Schools, we refused to base who got in our program on test scores and grade point averages.
Yep.
Hell no.
No.
We know we base it on initially teacher recommendations. Some of the best Freedom School students we ever had is because somebody in a school, a teacher said, you know what? Her grades aren't great and she be arguing a lot, but I love her spirit. She needs something like this. And that's who turns into the great leaders we have. That's how we got Nadir Suleiman. That's how we got Kevin White. That's how we got Asha Ray. I mean, that's how we got, in other words, I think about Stephanie Tisdale, who was at Central. We got the great grades, we got the no grades, we got the and everybody in the same.
We also got the Isaiah Thomases, the Marvin Duttons.
Come on, Mark, no question. And here's the beautiful thing about it: when you put everybody in the room, as they begin to critique the system, they begin to critique themselves. The key to education is, what am I going to do? It is magic. And this is the magic those Black teachers understood during segregation. And that is one of the things we paid for. That's why Vanessa Walker calls it the lost education of Horace Tate. What we're missing is we didn't have the facilities. We needed the resources. The teachers weren't being paid the same. We fought for all that. But what we lost, what Dr. King told us we was going to mess around and lose if we weren't careful, was the cultural thing that had a 16-year-old Martin Luther King graduate from high school, and Benjamin Mays at Morehouse said, come with me, son. Even though you got a C average coming out of high school. But I got you. Your mama said, you need to be in this school. I'm bringing you. And who ends up coming out? Martin Luther King.
Yep. And another point to connect all of this is a lot of times we say to Black folks, right? Don't forget who you are and where you come from. And a lot of times people base that on like the neighborhood that they grew up in or the family they came from. And if folks grew up in affluent neighborhoods or were, disconnected from the hood, that's what they kind of like mirror to or look at, like, oh, that's who I am. That's where I came from. But who you are and where you came from is way a much longer reach than that. It is your ancestors. It is ancient Kemet. It is Egypt. It is all those traditions. That's who you are, and that's where you came from. Right. And I think that people need to, again, continue to keep themselves centered in that when people were telling you that. Like that phrase has way more meaning than, oh, don't forget your block. Oh, don't forget your family.
Right. Rep your hood. Your hood stretches in time and space.
Yes.
Your neighborhood, your community begins with the beginning of humanity. And it includes where you came out of your mother's womb and where she came out of her mother's womb. And it includes the recent history, but there's no starting point that begins with oppression. Once you've done that, you are looking at those who oppressed you to determine how you measure your own humanity.
And the way to think about that too, is somebody took something from you. Something that you valued, something that was yours, something that you made, something that you worked for, something that you built. In reality, you would be fighting tooth and nail to get that back. Most of us, the majority of us, wouldn't lay down and die. That's why you can't start your history at oppression. They took something from us. We didn't start there. They didn't give us anything. They took something from us.
And if they take your child from you as you're struggling to get what you got, and that child never learns about it, your child will look at you and curse you to your face about the very thing you're trying to fight to get back. And that's the function of educate. You have to pass it on through the generation. That's exactly right, Shane. That's exactly right. And we know we can unblock that. We know it from Freedom Schools. You don't have to know it now, but you must want to know it. And then we must have places like this so you can come and we can come get you. Better yet, we're not waiting on you. That's why we're going to have it in Bongi. We're coming to get y'all. Come on over here. Come on in here with us.
And we have to go and get them.
We have to go get them.
Joy made a great point. We cannot be what we don't know.
That's
And
exactly
we know these young people don't know, because we know that folks have not moved beyond the concept of institutional education.
That's right.
So we do have to go get our young people so they do know, because
That's
when you know better, you do better.
Or better yet, I just said, we have to go to our young people.
Young people,
Right.
yes,
Because as we're building the center, and
for
please, y'all, we
sure.
got to support the center. We got to have place, but understand that we're not asking you to leave who and where you are. We coming to you.
Yes,
Now, we're gonna have a place too, and we want you to come over here too. But remember, we're all connected, so you ain't got to leave where you are to be part of this. But know that there are, and that's the function of it. That's why I went reading these histories. A lot of these cats taught at black colleges. A lot of them, those are the places we dream of. And these young people at Howard who are fighting right now, they are fighting because they're saying, I came to this place with an expectation.
yes.
Now it is up to you to help me fulfill the expectation. And if it's not there, it's not because I hate you, it's because I love you. Do you understand?
Yes.
I came here out of love, and I'm doing this out of love. So anybody thinking that somehow these young people who are protesting the HBCUs around the country, including Howard with the Blackburn takeover, are enemies, you have just shown yourself unfit to fulfill the responsibility, because you're not coming from a place of love.
And again, why would you see those young people as enemies? And
Why
all they're asking for is what was expected of you. When they signed that contract to come to your school, what you were supposed to provide.
Right.
That's it. And again,
it's really an ancestral contract.
Yes, and they are in the tradition of ancestors by fighting for what is theirs.
Yes, right. And they shouldn't have to. And there's no neutral place in it. If you ain't saying nothing, you pick the side.
And again, as the folks who are either the petty black bourgeois or the real black bourgeois, you have a responsibility to fill those gaps.
Right.
We have a responsibility to fill those gaps. And the last thing I want to say, because I know we're winding down on time, and this is to the real black bourgeois. People should be able to sacrifice for this movement, and not have to worry about what they're losing or the second check. But you have the money, you have the power, you have the access to fill the space and fill the gap.
Right.
A lot of times we go and we are asking the white man for this and that, but we shouldn't have to. When a lot of times some of you have arrived and have the ability to reach back down and close these gaps for all of us so that we can all rise up. I feel like it is our responsibility that when we made it or we're rising up to reach back down and bring a bunch of people with us. And sometimes that may not mean giving a bunch of people jobs. And maybe next time the police, because it will happen again, shoots one of our black brothers and sisters, and people want to protest or people want to walk out of these conglomerates and corporations, that you as a black bourgeois step in and fill that financial gap. Or as these people are getting locked up over and over again, that you as a black bourgeois provide free legal aid and services to these people, or support and financial support to their families as they're locked down fighting the fight and fighting the cause.
That's right. And if you're one of those true bourgeois, in other words, now you're in the manager class or the owner class, when you're the only one in the room, you better say something or not. Yes. But if you don't say nothing, it's no problem.
No, it's not or not. You better say something.
No, but I'm saying, but if you don't get to talk to us no more, because the race don't hold you together. And I'm glad you raised that. I know we're going over.
You don't represent me.
But you don't represent me. This was Fannie Lou Hamer's critique even of Martin Luther King. She says, Dr. King, I love him. He's done some good work. Then she names Septima Clark very specifically in an interview. She says, and Septima Clark and his organization, because she's making a very keen point. This teacher, I love Martin Luther King, but in SCLC, I'm looking at Septima Clark. She's a teacher. And then Fannie Lou Hamer says this, but Dr. King can't speak for me. He's middle class. He hasn't had the life experience I've had. And this is where it gets messy. Oh, Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer, stop. Don't put them two together. Dr. King committed, in some ways, class suicide. He could have been very comfortable. When he died, he didn't even have life insurance like he should have had. I mean, so he made a sacrifice, but Fannie Lou Hamer felt the lash. Even black hands beat her in that prison. So when she says King can't speak for me, what she's saying is, I want King with me, but when you're talking about my experience, you can't talk to him. So those of you,
you're not no sharecropper.
You don't know that. And so I want you with me. But this is where you said the black bourgeois, the handful that they are now, and there are black bourgeois now. Many of them, because they were singing and dancing and got paid to do that. We should tell you where the values are. My point is that in that moment, to me, it's not just reaching down, because we're talking about a clapless class system. It's reaching across. It's reaching around. In other words, when we connect to each other, we move together. But the idea they have is, okay, I'm rich, I'm successful, I want to help you be rich and successful. Maybe that shouldn't be the objective.
Nope.
Maybe the objective should be, let's work together to build a society where rich and successful ain't the measure of your humanity.
Of your humanity.
Everybody has health care. I mean, this is where the Panthers get, they mess up on the Panthers. Oh, they had free breakfast. They had the liberation schools. Yeah, you know why? Because they were telling people, ma'am, when you come get a sickle cell test, we don't want to provide this. What we're helping you understand is you have a right to health care.
Yes.
In other words, we're not trying to do this forever. It's survival pending revolution. We want you, once you get used to it, here's the question you should ask yourself. Why in the hell are my tax dollars not going to this free? Why I got to go over to the sister in the Panthers to get stuck with sickle cell? Where's my money? And that's why they shut the Panthers down. It wasn't the guns. It was the idea that they were helping people understand I have a right to an education. That's what freedom schools is. We used to say all the time, one day we want to drop freedom from school. Why? Because the school look like what we doing over here.
That's right. It's a fundamental right.
No question.
And we fight for something that's
right. You
build we live in a society where we can just not take care of people, or it pays for you not to die. You got to pay for this.
You got to pay for this.
You got to pay not to die.
Yes. We built the Black Education Pipeline to transform the schools for everybody. This was the mission of these Black educators.
That was their wildest dream.
Yes,
okay, to get back what was stolen from them. All right.
And guess who gets the benefit? Other people too.
Yep.
Why y'all so mad? You gonna get the education too? Yeah, but we don't want you to get.
We not y'all. You know, you can go for the ride. We not, but you gonna give us back what you stole from us.
No question.
Okay.
You know, no question.
Doc, we are overtime.
Way over.
I don't think anybody's mad about. But listen, I thank everybody as always for coming back at the week to support us and being in the room with Dr. Carr and I. And thank you for the dialogue in the chat. Please like, share, comment. But we will be back next week.
Yes.
Same time, same place. We might actually be at a different time next week. We will have a special guest next week, so we might be at a different time. Sister Goldie Muhammad will be joining us.
Okay.
For a show next week. So please, y'all, look out for the flyer and advertisement for that, because we may be at a different time next week. But thank you all for coming to support and watch this week.
Thank you, Shana.
We'll see y'all next week.
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Peace, y'all.